Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. And you know, we have made it to episode 3 of our Nightscape photography workshops online. And you know, today we are actually out here on the farm where we run our Nightscape photography workshops here in Australia. So that's a bit of a treat for you guys. So I can show you a few places here and some subject matter that we actually do shoot whilst we're here. It's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so we haven't got a whole lot more daylight. So I want to make use of that time and show you a few of these places. But what we're going to do later on, and this is really exciting, and the first of this for this particular series, is we're going to shoot a subject matter here, one of the subjects here on the farm, and I'm going to run you through how we do that, the camera settings and everything else. But then a bonus, what we're going to do is actually go back to the studio and do the editing of that particular image. So hopefully that's like a start to finish of that particular topic. Now, as a double bonus, what I'm going to do with this video is include the raw files of that same photo shoot. So you guys can actually have a go at doing the same edit yourselves. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I just love being out here. It's just so amazing. The birds are chirping. It's calm. There's not too much wind. It's clear as a bell. There isn't a cloud in the sky. So everything is going perfectly so far. But anyway, the subject of today's video is creative composition. Now, this is such an important topic, in fact, so important that I wanted to spend a whole episode talking about this. There's so many nuances attached to this creative composition, and I can tell you now that so many people have a lot of trouble with this. So let's get into it. What a beauty. Sitting out here on the farm, well, doing nothing really except sitting there waiting for us to come and take photographs of it under the gorgeous night sky. Now, you couldn't ask for anything better than that, could you? So I want to show you a few others around here whilst we're here. But you know, this concept of creative composition is one of the most challenging yet rewarding parts of shooting nightscape images. I mean, we have to ask ourselves a question: what is it that makes a great composition? What is it that makes a great image in the first place? Are we talking about lighting? Are we talking about angles? Are we talking about lens focal length? What is it? I think there are so many things that go into it, and our objective today is to try and dig a little bit deeper and find out some of the things that make a great nightscape image. All of those responses are certainly true and I think contribute to a great image. But there's one thing that must be present when attempting to get a great nightscape image, and that is the ability to see something in our mind before we actually see anything on the rear screen of the camera. I think we need imagination. We need to learn to pre-visualize our work. Look at this. It's absolutely fantastic. And you know, this old gig was hiding away in the shed for years before I even knew it was on the farm here. And we've been able to shoot this quite a few times, and it always comes up so well. We just wheel it out of the shed, put it out somewhere on the farm here, line it up with the Milky Way in the sky, and Bob's your uncle, we have an awesome shot. But you know, all the technical preparation in the world won't create a great shot. Now, we've talked a lot so far about preparing ourselves for shooting nightscapes. We've talked about the apps and the software, and we've talked about Stellarium and photo pills and all of these other things. Now, they are fantastic aids for us to get in the ballpark of being able to shoot something. And you know, we've also talked somewhat about camera settings. I've given you shooting guides, and I've given you manuals and all sorts of things. Those are all really important things. But on their own, they won't give us an awesome composition and an awesome image. So what is it that we have to do? Well, I think there's a few things that we have to look at, and I've got one great illustration that I'd like to bring to our attention right now. All right, so to illustrate my point, what I would like to do is go through a little diagram, if you like, talking about how people are actually wired. Now, the people who come to my Nightscape workshops here are going to laugh their heads off because they've seen me do this before, normally inside the house, But today, I'm going to do it out here because I've never done it out here and I think it would be really good. First things first, I've got a stick because I'm going to draw a line. So let's draw this line right down the middle of the room. No room, but we're outside, doesn't matter. Get rid of the stick. Okay, now the point of this exercise is to establish a little bit about how we're wired creatively. And it comes, I guess, down to our DNA. Now, people who are on this side of the line, all right, so we're on this left-hand side of the line, they're going to look at this camera. And what they're going to do is say, wow, that's a Nikon Z6. It's a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. That's a Nikon 20mm f1.8 lens. Oh man, that is awesome. It's got an EN15 battery. Look at that. Oh, beauty. Where is the manual? I want to read the manual. I want to know all about that camera. All right. Now, on the other side of this line, let's just have a bit of a squiz over here. People who are over on this side, they've got the camera in their hand, but they're not looking at the camera. They're looking around, trying to find something. Oh, look at that tree over there. It's got a branch in it that's shaped like a kangaroo. I can see the tail, I can see the ears. Oh yeah, I'm going to take a photo of that. Oh, hang on. How do you turn this on? Oh, there we go. Oh, hang on. No, that's not right. Oh, I've got to put a battery in it. It's got no battery. Oh, no, they find a battery, eventually get the battery in. Oh, I can't even see that branch anymore. It's gone. Which tree was I looking at? You see what I'm saying? People are wired differently. People on this side of the line have that sort of classic artistic bent. And people who are on this side of the line, well, they're the technical geek type people. Now, hear me clearly. I'm talking about extremes here, okay? Now, and also what I'm saying is there's nothing wrong if you're wired this way, and there's certainly nothing wrong if you're wired that way. The problem is when it comes to nightscape photography, a lot of these things start to clash. And you know, if we're wired technically, we can pull this camera apart and put it back together again, but that does not guarantee that we can actually take a decent photograph. And you know, the other thing is we might be wired over here and we can actually see all sorts of compositions in everything we look at. There's a composition everywhere, but we have no idea how the camera works. Now, the ideal situation is to be right here in the middle with a foot on both sides of the line. So the dividing line. Now, this is the difficult thing because for normal daytime photography, we can actually let the camera do a lot of the work. So in other words, you have very creative people who are photographers, and you know people like this, very creative, and they come out with some absolutely amazing work. Now, a lot of those people, certainly not all of them, but there's a fair percentage of those people that actually give the camera a lot of control over their exposures, and so therefore they can shoot in aperture priority or they can shoot in shutter priority. Some of them may even shoot in full auto and still get a great shot. That is until the lights go out and suddenly, oh hang on, the camera's not helping me anymore. What am I going to do? Okay, what they have to do is come over here. They're never ever going to get right over to the extreme side, but what they can do is, okay, well, I can learn something about the camera. Oh, how do I do that? How does it increase light gathering ability? Oh, gee, I didn't know that because I just let the camera do all the work before myself. So these are the things I'm talking about. Now, you might laugh and you might say, oh, I know people like that, or I know people like that. We all do. And that's the reality of the matter. And somewhere, all of us are somewhere across either on one side or the other side of this line. Now, like I said before, there is no problem. Doesn't matter where you're wired, doesn't matter if you're here or there, but what you have to do is work out how you can increase your ability and your capacity on the other side of the line. Now, people who are predominantly technical by nature, like these people over here, they have an almighty struggle sometimes just to get basic compositions. Now, they will spend all night working on camera settings and they'll work out focus and they'll do all of those technical things, which, by the way, are extremely important. Yeah, of course they are. But they will spend all their time on that and have very little understanding of how to compose an image. and therefore they're left wanting at the end. So, my little illustration here is simply to help you understand we are definitely wired somewhere either on one side or the other of this line. It's a matter of identifying where we're wired and then taking steps to just inch a little bit closer to the line. There's no way knowing that if you're wired here and you're one of these extremely creative people, there's no way knowing that you're ever going to get over here and suddenly be this person. It just doesn't happen that way. So, what you have to do is just take a little step, and eventually you might even end up with 1 foot on each side of the line. And that is where you need to be. So whichever way you look at it, photography is definitely an art form. And you know, when we're going out to shoot, particularly when we're going out to shoot nightscape images, what is it that's running through our head? I can guarantee you that the majority of people have technical settings running through their head. What should my shutter speed be? What should my ISO be? What aperture, what lens should I be using? What white balance should I be using? Now, all of those are valid things to consider, no doubt about that. But I can tell you right now that unless you get those things sorted, and in the back of your mind, I guess, as a sort of locked in, if you like, then there's no way you can actually have the mind space to actually concentrate on your creative composition. Now, I want to say to you that creative composition isn't really that much different to any composition that you might be used to during other daylight types of photography. Now, for example, have a look at this old shed. Now, I featured this in our first episode of our series. Look, it's just a rundown old shed. There's junk everywhere. Look in the foreground here. Look at this. It's just absolute rubbish. Now, most people would come over here, look at that rubbish and think, well, I'm just going to keep walking. There's no shot to be had here. Now, the thing is, we've got to sometimes look beyond the face value of what's confronting us for a subject matter. I can tell you that I would probably have done the same thing, but sometimes we just have to start thinking, stop and think. And you know, this happens with photographers all over the world. We don't actually stop and think and look and listen. These are the basic things that I think we all need to do. And so with all of that in mind, when you're looking at all of this junk and this rubbish and everything else, what is it that we're thinking? Now, I can tell you that if you really have a good look at it, what you can see is shape, texture, patterns, okay, character. These are the things that we're looking for. Now, the other part of it that goes hand in hand with being able to compose a shot and see something that looks good to our eye is to work out what it would look like with light on it. Because remember, we're shooting nightscape images. We're not shooting it in the daytime. And daytime light, for the majority of the day, is flat and pretty lifeless and boring, to be honest. That's why most landscape photographers will get up in the very early morning to get the sunrise, and they'll go at sunset when the light's nice and low down to the ground. I'm going to talk a lot more about light and lighting in general next week, but I want you to associate the fact that when we're shooting nightscape images, something like this that actually has texture and shape and pattern is an ideal subject once we work out how to light it. So what I'm saying to you is to get to a point where the settings of the camera get into a sort of an autopilot mode so that we're not so much worried about them. Now, a lot of you may remember I did a video featuring this little billabong and this little creek and shooting some nightscapes with some trees and some reflections in the water. Now, this is normally not full of water, so I'm really fortunate that I'm back here again and there's heaps of water here again. So that gets my brain really jumping and my creative juices flowing because there's so many possibilities with reflections with water. Now, during the daytime, what I would come down here and I would see this and I would look at all of these trees and I think, oh, there's too many trees here for a shot of the night sky. So I'd give up and I'd say, oh, well, I'll see if I can find somewhere else. But no, don't always do that. I've done that for many years, and now I've realised there's always an opportunity. So if you look just over to this side, there's a little bit of clear sky, and there's certainly enough water there to get a reflection. And I did that, and you've seen some of these images on my page before. There's so much you can do, and add a bit of light, just a touch of a light on the edge of the tree. A couple of these images I actually used a flash to help light some people up. We shone some torches into the sky, all because there was just a little bit of water there to add that reflection and add that dynamics to the shot. So here's another great composition that I shot on roughly the same time as the other one. And you know, it's only because there's water here and this gorgeous big gum tree in the background. Now, I can link these videos at the end so you can get a bit more of a picture of how I went about it, the camera I used, the lens I used, and the settings I used to shoot. But my point here is that it's all about being able to pre-visualize what you can see with this water in here when there's no water there. Because this is a creek, it's a gully, it doesn't always have water. So when it does have water, you can say, right, I'm going to go back to where that creek is, I'm going to shoot that tree and see if I can get a reflection. All right, so it's getting quite dark now and it's very difficult to see anything. I'm a little bit underprepared because I left most of my lights back in the car, which is way over there. But this old plough, now, I did a whole video on this plough, which I'll link later on. Gorgeous, it's just up on this little rise. Now, the rise is only a metre off the ground, but you know, that metre is all I needed to get my camera on a low enough angle to get the sky behind and the Milky Way core to feature straight above this machine. This brings me to another point that I want to stress right now, and that is that we change the height of wherever the camera is, and that makes a huge difference to the composition. Now, I want to talk about horizons. Now, this is something I learned many, many years ago, photographing weddings and portraits. Now, I used to shoot people and bridal couples and all sorts of things, and one of the things that I used to like to do was to compress the shot with a longer focal length, say a 200mm lens, so you get back a fair way. And what I would find is that oftentimes my images would have the horizon cutting off behind the neckline of the people. Why is that? Well, because I'm about 6 feet tall. So when I'm standing up, most of the people I was shooting were my height or less. So in other words, I was looking down on them slightly. Now what I realised was, as soon as I started getting down a little bit, squatting down just that little bit, I found that my composition started looking a whole lot better. That's because the horizon line was suddenly down lower below the body of the people. And therefore I had a clearer horizon. And guess what? What I've done is actually translated those principles and everything to do with portrait photography into my nightscape photography. So now what I do is I get my tripod quite low down to the ground, and for a subject like this, which is actually pretty low anyway, there's not particularly high off the ground, it features more. Now, one of the things about lowering your tripod or lifting your tripod is if your tripod is quite high, then whatever is in the distant background becomes prominent in the image. So mountains, trees, you know, whatever it is that's in the background. But if you get your tripod down low, right down to the ground, you will find that whatever is in the close foreground proximity takes prominence in the picture. And that's exactly what I want to happen. I want my foreground to take prominence. It's not that I don't want the Milky Way to be prominent, of course I do, but that's huge. That's going to be there, it's going to be big and it's impressive. But what I want is for my foreground subject matter to take prominence and be a feature. So when it comes to composition, get that tripod down low. When I'm looking to compose a nightscape image, as much as possible, I still want to incorporate the basic compositional tools such as leading lines, rule of thirds and horizon placement. As you can see from these images, I'll position the camera to achieve this whenever I can. There are always occasions where it's impossible to get these things to line up due to positional constraints or simply a lack of easy access to the foreground subject matter. Okay, well here we are back at the car. It's a little bit more light here. You can see what we're doing. But you know what? down there by the water. It's not a warm night, but it's not cold. Just on dusk. It's a recipe for disaster with mosquitoes. So I've got my insect spray here. I'll tell you what, those midges I encountered a month or so ago, I am not going down that track again. So I'm going to put a bit of spray on, and then we'll wait, I think, until it gets dark, because I want to show you this composition I've got, and we're going to light it, we're going to shoot it, and then we're going to go back and do the post-processing. In the meantime, I might have a cup of tea, something to eat, and get rid of the mozzies. Okay, so this is where the rubber really does hit the road. This is our subject that I'm going to show you how I'm going to shoot it, then we're going to edit it later on. But it's an old farm, it's a drill of some sort. Now, you might remember I've photographed this before, but from the other side, and I actually did a video about the whole processing and everything, so that might be worth a look later on. I'll put the link down below. But I shot that particular image with the camera over the other side, facing down towards the west, and that was because that was shot in October. And in October, here in the southern hemisphere, the Milky Way is stretching across in the western sky. So as it stands at the moment in April, I'm going to be putting my camera just down here, facing down there towards the east. Now, you might remember when we talked about stellarium last week and photopills, we talked about looking at the compass and working out the bearings and all those sorts of things. Well, that's exactly what I've done. Now, I know, because I've been here quite a few times, that if I put my camera over here, that's straight down to the east. I also know that if I get my phone compass out and work it out to about 110, 120 degrees, that's exactly where the core is going to come up over those trees in the background down there. So what I'm going to do now is show you how I'm going to set up to actually take this shot. Okay, so here we are talking about photopills. Now, I mentioned this to you in the last couple of weeks, using the photopills app while I'm here. Now, I've already said to you that I know where the direction of the Milky Way is going to be here, and I don't necessarily need to use this, but I'm using it to show you exactly the view that you might get when you come out here on location. All right, so here we are. I've got the foreground lit up so I can see it in the foreground. Now you can see here, this is the horizon line, and as I scroll through just with my finger, in time, that's in about 30 minutes time or thereabouts, that's where the Milky Way core is going to be, right over the top of this machine. So I know from this position I'm at right now, that's exactly where I need to have my camera to get this to come right over the top. Now, sometimes I don't want the Milky Way to come straight over the top. I might want to put it off to an angle a little bit. So if I want to do that, all I need to do is just gradually move across and just work out where the angle is. If I want the core to be off to the side, on the right or the left, it doesn't matter. But these are the things that you decide as far as a composition is concerned. Because remember, we're still talking about things like leading lines, rule of thirds, and all those other things that are still really important. So that's what we're going to look at right here. So here's our next compositional decision. I've decided to put my camera and tripod quite low down to the ground, as you can see here. Now, why have I done that? Well, exactly the reason I mentioned to you earlier, because I know over there on that horizon there are some trees. There's a tree line there. Now, I as much as I can, I want to try and get this machine to be above that horizon line. It's not always as easy as that, but wherever you can, that's the intention as far as I'm concerned. Now, remember, I also said that the more I can get that camera and tripod down low, it actually emphasizes the foreground subject. In this case, the old machine. That's going to make the machine stand out a lot, because let's face it, I'm using a 20mm lens here. I'll go through the settings in a minute. 20mm lens. So I need to get reasonably close. It's not a great big machine. I need to get pretty close to it to get it to fill the frame. And this is one of the things. See, I will talk to you a lot about lens selection and lens choice as we go through this series. If I was using a wider angle, say an ultra-wide lens like a 14, a 15 or a 16mm lens, that machine would look like a little ant on the frame. It's not big enough, and therefore you find yourself getting really close to try and fit it in and make it stand out. Then what happens is the machine gets all out of distorted and out of shape because those ultra wide angle lenses just do that. That's the nature of ultra wide angle lenses. So my 20mm lens here is still a wide angle lens, but I can afford to get back just a little bit more and still make that a little bit bigger. Now, of course, that is going to compromise our focus issues, and I'll get onto that a bit later, but these are all of the decisions I'm making. Remember how I said that we have to overcome all of the technical decision making before we can actually create the image? So I'm sort of elaborating on some of that now. Technical things like lens choice, ISO speed, shutter speed, getting the camera down on a good solid tripod, working out my angles. These are all technical things, but once I overcome that, I can then start to create, and that's when the magic happens. So as far as camera settings are concerned, I'm pretty keen to shoot this wide open at f1.8. I've established that my shutter speed needs to be around about 15 seconds. Now, firstly, I'm going to shoot a single shot just to have a look at that. And to get that single shot, to get the sky to be really nice and bright, I've set my ISO to 6400 down the bottom. So that's a pretty high ISO, but I know this camera and lens can handle that, no worries at all. But what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to adjust my settings because I'm going to do some stacking for noise reduction. And I'm going to refocus and do some light painting on the actual machine. So we'll get into that and we'll have a look. I'll do a test shot first because I want to have a look and see what my background looks like. Now, as you can see here, I'm using my Nikon Z6 with the 20mm f1.8S lens. So I've been doing a fair bit of testing on this lens, and it's really good to be able to get this one out into the field one more time. Now, I've got my camera mounted on my Sirui W2204 carbon fibre tripod. Now, it's a really good, lightweight, yet very durable tripod, and I use it for just about all of my nightscape images these days. As well as that, you'll notice I've got my Yongnuo RF603 wireless triggers attached to the camera. Now, the reason I use that is so that I can get away from the camera and trigger the shutter. It's a really handy way of doing it. They've got a range of about 50 or 60 meters, and they work really, really well. Now, people ask me about these triggers all the time, and the reason I use them is because I need to get away from the camera to do my light painting. Sometimes I'm only shooting at 10-second exposures or thereabouts, and by the time I was over here pressing the button and then running over there, I wouldn't have much time left to do any light painting. So it's a real time saver. They work fantastically. If I was just shooting single exposures without any light painting, sure, I could just sit here behind the camera and press the button or use a 2-second delay or something like that. But one thing I don't like, especially when I'm with a group of people, is the timer that's built into the camera. And the reason I don't like them is because when you press the button and they go beep, 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 they send out usually an orange light. And that orange light is a real pain. It gets in everybody else's shot, lights up the subject, and I just don't like stuff like that. I'd much prefer to do something that doesn't have lights or lighting up my foreground or anything else, and these wireless remotes are perfect for that. Now, the next thing I want to do is actually focus on some stars. So what I've done, I've zoomed in using the plus and minus buttons on the back screen of my camera. Just move it up so I can see some bright stars. And now I'm just moving the focus ring until the stars come into focus. Now, one of the things to realize is that you can actually go too far. And this is what's known as a fly-by-wire lens. It just keeps turning. Some lenses that you have will have hard stops and you can only go a certain distance, but that hard stop does not ensure that it's at infinity. You have to actually check and make sure you've got that focus right. So there you go. I'm pretty sure I've got focus there now. I'm just going to zoom back out and get ready to take the shot. Okay, so what I've just done is taken one single shot at f1.8, 15-second shutter speed at ISO 6400, white balance of 4150 Kelvin. And what I did for that 15 seconds, I just ran around with the torch on one side, just a slight bit of light on the right-hand side and a little bit on the left-hand side. Now, the reason I did that was really just to get a picture of what this is going to look like. Now, what I've discovered is that I'm not happy with the composition. Why? Because on this left-hand wheel of the machine, there's a tree right behind it. And I just don't like the fact that the tree is interrupting my line of the wheel. So what I'm going to do is move around a little bit more this way so that I've got more free space. Now, this is an interesting thing. With all these lights and everything here now, you can't see a thing. But of course, when the lights are out for a while and your night vision starts to kick in, you can actually see the silhouette of the horizon line. So all you need to do is sit here with all the lights out for a little while, actually wait until your night vision gets there and you'll be able to see the silhouette and the outline. And then it's not very hard to actually compose the general outline area. But of course, taking that test shot is a good idea. So I'm going to do another one. Just move my camera probably about 2 feet that way and we'll see how that goes. Okay, so there's my first shot and you can see what I'm talking about. The tree here interrupts the line of the wheel. So then I took another second shot with exactly the same settings and just moved the wheel over, or I moved the camera. So now I'm seeing more of a side-on view of that wheel, but I've got more clear space here. Now the Milky Way core, you can see up here, which is sort of moved over to the third line. Now, I'm looking at this image and I'm trying to make sure that it sort of follows the rule of thirds. So I've got the third line down the bottom where the horizon is. I've got the other third line there where the Milky Way core is. And there's a fair bit of dead space over here. There's nothing wrong with dead space. Don't ever think that you always have to fill up every part of your frame. I think that's pretty good. Now you'll notice here I've got a nice low horizon. That's what I was aiming for. As much as I possibly could, I want to make sure that that machine is above the horizon. Now you can look at this histogram. It's quite bright. That's because I shot this at f1.8, 15 seconds at 6400 ISO. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to shoot and stack 10 images because I want that sky to be really, really good. Now, if I zoom in, yeah, it looks pretty good as far as sharpness, but one thing you will definitely notice if I move in on the machine, it's out of focus. Why is that? Because I'm just too close to get all of that in one shot. Now, one of the reasons I do stacking and I do blending is to get everything sharp and clear and in focus. So you can see from that image, at a glance it looks okay, but the foreground is not in focus and that is never acceptable as far as I'm concerned. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shoot 10 shots at the same settings, except I'm going to change my shutter speed to 10 seconds rather than 15. I'm going to shorten it up. I'm going to leave all the settings the same. f1.8, ISO 6400, 4150 Kelvin. And then I'm going to shoot a number of frames for the foreground. I'm going to do some light painting. And what I'm going to do there is stop down my aperture to f5, and that's going to sharpen up the image for a start. Then I'm going to drop my ISO to about 500. And I'll be shooting maybe 2 or 3. I don't think this machine needs any more than 2, but sometimes a third shot is necessary. We'll just see how we go. So I'll give that a go now. All right, so I've taken my 10 background shots for the Milky Way to stack. I've taken 3 foreground shots, one from the left-hand side, one from the right-hand side, and one just over the top, sort of from the back. And I'm not sure I'm going to need all of those to do this stacking, but it doesn't matter. It's better to take them whilst you're out here in the field rather than get back in the editing studio and think, oh, I wish I'd taken that one and covered that area of the machine. So that's what I want to do. Now, a lot of you are going to be asking me about what torches and what lighting techniques I used and everything else. Look, I'm going to refer you to some other videos this week because next week our episode is going to be all about light painting and lighting of subjects and all that sort of stuff. I think I need to go into it in greater detail then, but for the reference of this video, I can show you some other links to some other videos which will help you along the way. Suffice to say, I'm using this little LED Lenser P7.2 torch, and it's not very bright, as you can see. That's all I use for all of my light painting. This particular one has the half CTO gel on the front. The reason I do that is to help me balance out the LED light that is in here. Most lights that people use these days are LED, and of course they tend to have a bit of a blue tinge about them. So the half CTO meaning color temperature orange, helps to balance that out and bring it back to more of a daylight setting. And especially since I'm using about a 4100 Kelvin white balance. Again, I'm going to talk about all of that next week, but in the meantime, what we're going to do is go back to the studio and we're going to edit these images, and you can see them here on the screen. I think they look good, and I'm pretty confident this image will come up really, really well. Now I'm going to keep this as quick as I can because this video is going to be very long. But firstly, what we're looking at here is a single shot of the Milky Way above the drill. Now you can see when I zoom in close, that drill is way out of focus. And that is one of the reasons why I focus stack and why I blend my images. But if you look at the image full screen, on its own, it doesn't look too bad for a single shot. Now remember, this is shot wide open at f1.8. So of course, what I did then, I went on and took 10 images here. You can see them all down the bottom. So what I'm going to do is send these out to Sequator. So I go to File, Export. I'm going to call these drill stack. Going to create them as TIFF files, no watermark. Export that, and we'll just have a look and see what that looks like in Sequator. So here we are in Sequator. Double click, there's our stack. So we'll select all of them, open, and there's one of the stacks. You can see how it looks there. Before we go any further, I've got to select the output where I want this to go. So I'm going to call it Sequator drill stack and press save. It's one of the programs that actually asks you to select an output destination before you get to the end, which is a little bit unusual, but that's okay. So let's go to Composition Align Stars. Down here where it says Freeze Ground, that's a really important step to take. Then we click Sky Region. Now I'm going through this in a fairly brisk pace because I don't want to waste our time here too much, but I'm going to rub out the sky. I've got quite a few videos demonstrating this, and I'll link all of those videos down below so you can check it out. Now, what I want to do is basically get right around the structure of this, and I'm going to do that, fast forward it so you don't have to watch me do this. All right, so you can see here I've gone right around that tree line. As much as I can, I've got around the edges of this machine. It's important to get as close as you possibly can. A lot of people talk about having these little artifact lines around the edges, particularly these edges here. Now this, I don't think will be a problem. Trees that are close in the foreground tend to be more of a problem than this type of machine. So anyway, we're going to continue on. So I'm going to press start. Now this is going to do all of the aligning and stacking. It's a very, very quick process. So we'll just wait for that to happen right now. Now, as you can see, that's finished. It took a total of 39 seconds, which is quite amazing. And there is our end result. Now, you can't see too much there at the moment, but it looks pretty good to me. So I'm just going to close out of this, save that, and we're going to go back to Lightroom. And so before I go out of Lightroom here, I just want to show you the settings I did for those images. Not much. I just added a little touch of exposure here, plus whites a little bit, and as you can see, nothing else was really altered, except I added some tint. Now the Z6, I've mentioned this before, the images come out fairly green. There's a fair bit of green air glow here anyway, so I just pushed it up into the magenta refraction. But apart from that, so if you look at this image here, for example, and see the before and afters, you'll notice it's very green to start with. I've just changed that green color because I don't really like that heavy green that the camera has by default, but it's easy to change here. Now, what I want to do now is head over to the light painted images, and here we go. You can see one there. Now, I've already done some edits here. I've added some exposure, clarity. I normally add clarity into my images. Now, have a look when I zoom into this shot. See how sharp that is? Now, one thing you're going to notice here is there's noise in this image. Can you see that? Now, I'll fix that later, but I just want to point it out that there's sensor noise here. Even though this is shot at a much lower ISO, I find this sometimes on the Z6. It's really easy to get rid of, but it's there. I want to point it out to you. You can see the difference in clarity between this shot and that first one I showed you. Have a look at that. Massive difference. And this is why I do this method. So let's get out of there for a minute. So there's three images, that one, you can see the light here, and this one. And there's the light, that's me over the top, shining a light onto the top of the machine. So what I'm going to do here is select those three images by just holding down Control on the keyboard, and I'm going to go right click on one of them, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. So let's do that. Photoshop will open now. It'll just take a little while to do that. So once all the layers come into Photoshop, you can see them here, 3 layers, one on top of the other, and I can reveal them or hide them. I want to bring in my sky layer. So to do that, I'm going to go up to File, Open, navigate to where they are, find the shot that says, here we go. And there it is. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. So select it and copy it and paste it. There we go. It's coming on top. Now to copy and paste, you just go up here into the edit menu, copy, paste, select, etc. I'm going to drag that down to the bottom because I want the sky layer to be at the back of all of these things. Now when you're working in Photoshop, whatever is on the top here in this stack is what you see. And the one at the bottom you can't see until we do something to enable us to see it. I'm going to just select these top layers by clicking on the top one and then holding down Shift on the keyboard and clicking on the bottom one. I'm going to change the blend mode here from normal to lighten. And essentially what that's doing is giving us a snapshot of what this is going to look like. Now already that looks pretty good, but I'm going to do some adjustments. Okay, so the adjustments I'm going to do will be, I'm going to add a layer mask, and you can see a lot of videos where I do this exact same process. So if I feel like I'm rushing through it, I apologize, but I don't want this video to be too long. So I'm going to select a hard brush and quite a large one, make sure the opacity is at 100%, and I'm just going to rub the sky out. Now you can see what's happening here. You're not seeing anything in the background because I've actually disabled these other layers. If I had that bottom layer enabled, you can see the sky, but you can't see where I'm rubbing out. So that's why I turned them off. So here we go. I'm just going to rub out. This is just a rough getting in close with the big brush. Then I'm going to change the size of my brush to a small brush and zoom in on the image so I can just get closer. Now my aim here is to rub out the stars in the background. Can you see these stars? I'm not concerned about any of the black areas. It's only the stars. Now remember how I mentioned there was noise in these images? You can see it here again. We are going to get rid of that, so don't stress. It's pretty easy to get rid of that. So I'm not selecting, now this is, listen carefully, I am not selecting using selection tools up here. I'm not going to even worry about doing that in this image because I don't need to. Because mainly there's dark blackness in this image. The only thing I want to get rid of is the stars. Okay, so the stars, there's a couple of stars in here on the edge, but hardly any. Now I know it's off-putting because you can see that noise, and I also know that a lot of you who are OCD are going to look at this and say, man, I can't stand this, what you're doing, because you need to be selecting right down to the edge. But just bear with me because you will notice as soon as I turn that bottom layer on, the edge disappears. See how gorgeous that looks now? Clean as a whistle. Let me just go in close and show you what that looks like. Clean as anything. Turn the sky layer back off. You can see this rough edge. Once I turn it back on, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Now, I want to get rid of that noise here. See all this noise in here? It's so annoying. So what I'm going to do is select the layer that noise is on because I know it's on this top layer. It's not on the bottom layer. And what I'm going to do is go to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, and I'm going to select 1 pixel and press OK. And you can see that noise is gone. Absolutely magic. Just gone, just like that. So that was a pretty easy fix, wasn't it? It's all gone right across the board. Now what I'm going to do, because I want the same mask on all of these layers, I'm just going to enable the second layer, click on the mask, hold down Alt on my keyboard and drag it down. And that copies that mask onto the next layer. Now what I'm also going to do is select that next layer, not the mask, the layer itself, go up to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, 1 pixel, OK. And the noise is gone. We'll do the same thing on the third layer, Alt, drag down, copy, select the layer itself. See all this noise? It's terrible. But we go to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, 1 pixel, gone. So all the noise now has been taken out of this image and it looks as crisp and sharp as anything. Now all I have to do is get rid of some bits and pieces like this light painted bit up here that I don't want to include. So all I have to do is work out which layer that's on. To do that, I just turn the layers on and off. There it is, it's on that second one. Somehow I've missed out on copying that layer mask. There we go, it's gone because I accidentally forgot to copy that layer mask. So that's all right, but in case if that layer mask wasn't covering it, you just rub it out manually. What do we do now? So what I want to do is just have a good look at this image and work out which of these layers I perhaps don't need, or if there's anything that I don't like. Now you can see what happens when I turn each one off. You can see where the light painting has taken effect. Now on this particular layer, this third one, I don't really think I need all of this ground lit. So what I'm going to do is select that layer. Remember, you've got to select the layer mask, not the layer. Go up to my brush, make it a nice soft brush and a reasonably biggish one. Let's just have a look at that. Drop my opacity down a bit, and then I'm just going to rub out some of the foreground here that I don't think I need, and a little bit on the actual drill itself. Now I'm being a bit selective. It's not doing a whole lot, to be honest, and I don't want it to do a whole lot. See, I don't need much of that layer. That's essentially what I'm saying here. That layer is not doing much. So I said this when I was out there shooting, that I don't necessarily need 3 layers. I just want little bits of each one sometimes. So let's turn that one off there and see what we get. So one of the things I'm noticing with this one is it's lighting up a lot of this ground here, and I'm not too sure I want that. So I'm going to find that layer. Remember, I'm on the second layer here, but I'm going to go to a bigger brush again. This is one of the things that I'll often do, is feather that brush a lot over the edge. And that gives you a nice clean, so it's just giving me a general cleanup of the overspill. That's all it's doing. I'm not trying to rub out too fine a detail here because I'm on a 51% opacity at a really large brush size. If I rubbed out something I didn't want to rub out, I just go over here and change this to be from black to white. You can see here this little toggle switch here, and I can rub it back in again. But as it stands at the moment, that looks pretty good. So I've still got the detail in the middle here, but I've taken out these edge bits. Now on this top one, that's pretty heavy down here in this bottom corner. So I'm going to do the same thing, make sure I select the top layer and the layer mask itself, and just feather over the edge. You see what I'm doing here? I'm just feathering the edge. So I'm not getting into the center here, I'm just feathering around the edges. Now when I look at what's happening, I can see where the light's actually affecting the image. And it's affecting it mainly in the center, which I like. I don't want too much light around the edges. And you can see what's happening here. That one there's hardly doing anything, which is okay, don't mind that. If I want to do some fine adjustments to this image, I just make my brush smaller and perhaps just rub in little bits and pieces here or there that you want to adjust. Then zoom in closer so I can actually see what it's doing. So there you can see the bits that have been painted on each layer. It's not too bad, is it? Now that layer there isn't doing a whole lot. It's just subtle, and I think subtle is good. If you don't like areas, you can just go in and rub it out a little bit. And the good thing about this method is using a layer mask is everything you do here is reversible simply by going over here and clicking on the white or the black. So if I click on the white, I can rub it back in again. So nothing is lost. It's all really, really good. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. So let's just leave that where it is. The other thing I want to do is look at the sky. Now, I'm going to add what's known as an adjustment layer to this sky. It's not going to affect any of the other layers. So go down the bottom to this little circle, click on it, go up to curves. So I'm going to add what's known as a curve adjustment layer, an S curve. You can see it here. What it's doing is actually adding contrast to the image. So I've dropped the darker bits and raised the lighter bits a little bit. And I don't mind that. I think it looks pretty good. So you can see the difference when I go from there to there. Don't mind it at all. One of the other things I'll often do is add a levels adjustment layer. So let's do that. Levels. It does a very similar thing to the curves. And just gives you that extra layer, if you like, of tonal adjustment. So there's the levels and there's the curves. So when they're both applied, that's what it looks like. Now you can make your own assessment and judgment of what you like and what you don't like. You know, everyone has their likes and dislikes when it comes to editing images. But as it stands at the moment, this shot looks pretty good. Now, one thing I'm going to show you very quickly here is some star minimization. So what I'm going to do is disable the foreground for a minute, and I'm going to basically group these three layers together. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Layer and go down to where it says Merge Visible. Click on that. Now those three layers are now one layer. I've done that because I can actually work on just that one layer. Now I want to go to Select. I have other videos about this, but I'm going to go to Color Range, click on Highlights, and then adjust the range and the fuzziness to give me somewhere around about what I think I need to minimize these stars. So let's go about there, press OK, select again, modify, expand by 2 pixels. Let's do that. Now I'm going to go to select once more, go down to modify and feather 1 pixel. I'm going quick because I want this video to not be too long, but I have detailed instructions on how to do this in quite a few other videos, and I'll link those. Filter is our next thing. Go down to Other, Minimum. Click on Minimum, and I'm going to go 0.8 pixels here. Make sure this is set to roundness down the bottom, and I'm going to click OK. And now the software is doing its work, and if I deselect, you can now see that I've done what's known as star minimization. I'll click these other layers back on so we can see them. And what that basically does is takes out a lot of the faint stars and leaves the brighter, and it certainly gives the sky this real dreamy look. So what I'm going to do before I go any further is add another curves adjustment layer here. Just a little mildish curve. And once again, I've brought some more contrast into that sky, and I like that. I think it looks pretty good. Now, you might look at this and say, you know, do I really like that or don't I like it? You can make adjustments to your leisure, again, because you've adjusted this with a layer mask. So it's got a layer there, and I can take bits of it out if I want. For example, I'll just show you quickly. If I want that curve to be not quite so effective down here, I can just rub it out a bit. See how, and I'm at 50%, I can drop that even further, do about 20%, and sort of feather that in. So that's quite an effective way of doing things. Another thing you can do, if you want to, is adjust at another photo filter. What that's done, it comes up by default as a warming filter, which I don't actually mind too much, to be honest. So I'm going to add that warming filter. Now, before and after the warming filter, you can see what that does. Now, you might look at that and say, oh, no, I like it the way it was. But what you can do, and I'm just showing you this, I like the glow on the horizon being a little bit warmer, but up the top here, I sort of liked it the way it was. So I'm just going to rub out a bit of that filter across the top here. Remember, I'm at 24% opacity on quite a large soft brush. So I can just rub it out. See what I've done there? So I've still got the warming filter there, but it's not affecting every part of the image anymore. These are some of the things that you can do with these filters and built-in adjustments in Photoshop. All right, so that doesn't look too bad. I really, really like that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to flatten this image because I don't want to keep all of these layers. It's a massive file size. If I did want to keep the layers, sure, I can just leave this as a layered TIFF file and go back to Lightroom. And it's a big file size, but what that means is you can come back again and re-edit this image. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go up to Layer, down the bottom, Flatten Image. And what that's done, as you can see, there's only one layer. So all of my adjustments here are now compressed down to one layer. I'm going to click on the cross-out button, Save Changes. I'll say yes. It's now going to take me back to Lightroom. And here we are, we have our image in Lightroom. So as you can see in Lightroom, when we look at this full screen, it doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty awesome. Look at that beautiful detail in the Milky Way. This is what you get by stacking your sky images. Gorgeous detail. Also, we've got this wonderful detail in the foreground. As you can see, when I zoom in, look how sharp that is. That is just absolutely beautiful. No noise. All that pixel noise is gone. Absolutely awesome. Now, one thing you might want to do, and I do this quite frequently when I get back into Lightroom, is I add a bit of dehaze. And watch what happens when I add dehaze. You can see that it suddenly gives a little bit more clarity to the sky. Now, I've added that plus 26. You might think to yourself, oh, you know, I don't need that. Well, that's up to you. Editing is a personal choice. You don't need it. necessarily. I'm just showing you some of the options here. So what I've got here is a natural vignette. I haven't added a vignette, but there is, see how it's dark around the corners? And it's like that because I feathered those brushes whilst I was in Photoshop. I could add a vignette, and often you might add a radial filter or something, but I don't need one, as you can see. It's another reason why sometimes I don't mind the natural vignette that's in these lenses, because it gives you this little bit of a light fall off on the edges, and I actually don't mind that at all. So full screen on this image, there you have our final shot. I think it looks pretty awesome, and I hope you appreciate that as well. So to summarise creative composition, firstly we need to spend considerable time working out our camera settings and work on learning the various features of our particular camera. Lock these settings into our memory banks and concentrate on pre-visualising our intended photography location. Spend time planning using various apps so we know where the Milky Way will be in the sky. Take the time to have a good look at the surrounding landscape and take note of trees and other obstacles in the background. Get your camera down low to place greater emphasis on close foreground subjects and lower the horizon. Never forget to make use of leading lines, the rule of thirds, and horizon placement in our images. And finally, always double check your focus when shooting nightscape images in the field. And so there you have it, creative composition in a nutshell. And I'll tell you what, it's been so good to get back out here on the farm under the Milky Way with this gorgeous subject matter to shoot. I'll tell you what, it doesn't get much better than that, I reckon. Now, I just want to remind you of the free downloads. We've got this shooting guide, which is free to download on my website, and also this program guide, which is also on the website. There's 22 pages there of all sorts of goodies for you to look at concerning episodes that we've shot so far already and ones that are coming yet that we haven't yet seen. So that's all there. The links are in the description down below this video. And by the way, when you go to my website, there's a link there with the PayPal on it, and for anyone who feels led to contribute to the running of this program and everything else, then I would really appreciate if you did. There's no obligation for that. In fact, all of these videos are going out free on YouTube, as you already know. So that's about it for this week. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode because we're going to be talking about lighting and everything associated with that. It's a big topic, it's a creative topic, and I know a lot of you are really keen to see that. And speaking of that, I really appreciate all the comments that you guys leave underneath these videos, because that's my link to you, and the comments are like gold. I just so appreciate them. Okay, all right, until I see you next time, you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you later.